Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Furlong, and today we're going to be talking about the work of Gregor Mendel? Today we're going to look at the life's work of Gregor Mendel, the person who came up with this whole branch of science known as genetics. But before we do that, a couple of definitions. These are things that we've heard of before, and I just wanted to make sure that we have an understanding of exactly what they mean. Inheritance is the acquisition of traits by the offspring. So for example, if we inherit something, we receive something. In this case, we are receiving genes from our parents. Heredity, on the other hand, is the transmission of traits by parents to offspring. So this is how we will transmit our traits to our offspring or to our children. So inheritance is receiving those traits. Heredity is the passing on of those traits. The person who started this branch of science known as genetics is an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel. Now Mendel lived in the mid-19th century and lived in a monastery, and his main job was to tend to the gardens. Well, one of the types of plants that he grew were peas. He used the pea plants to study inheritance, and he grew thousands of pea plants over 7 years, collecting all this data about various traits in these plants. Because he started this branch of biology known as genetics, he is called the father of genetics. So you see what's happening here? He originated this branch of science known as genetics, but he's a monk, he's a priest, he's a father. Get it? The father of genetics?
That is not funny.
Anyways, Mendel looked at 7 different traits on the pea plants, and here we can see some of these. He looked at the color of the seeds, the shape of the seeds, the color of the flowers, the color of the pods, the shape of the pods, where did the flowers grow, the height of these plants, all of which we now know have a genetic component to it. Let's use the height of the pea plants as an example of what Mendel did. So he had some pea plants that were always growing tall and some that were always growing short. And so he took these tall plants and the short plants and cross-pollinate them together. And this is what is known as the pea generation, or this is what's called the parental generation. He had estimated that if he cross-pollinates these two, that all the plants would be a medium size. So he went through the process of cross-pollinating them, had to grow them the following season, and it turns out that in this first generation from these plants, that all of them were tall. That wasn't his hypothesis. The experiment had to continue. So Mendel randomly selected some plants and cross-pollinated those. Now here he's taking 2 tall plants and cross-pollinating. Again, hypothesizing that he'll probably get all tall plants again. So in the second generation, or what's known as the F2 generation, he started getting tall plants, but what's this? He had a short plant. Well, wait a minute. When a tall and a short were crossed, they only produced tall, but when 2 tall plants were produced, they produced a tall and short plant. So a couple of conclusions that Mendel came up with. One, an individual's characteristics are determined by factors that are passed from parents to offspring. Now you have to remember, you know a lot more about DNA and genetics than Mendel ever did. So he just said that there's got to be something that's being passed on, and he just referred to those things as factors. He had said that some of these factors have to be dominant while others are recessive. This is what is known as the principle of dominance. This is the first of his 3 principles. Now essentially what he's saying is that some of these factors will always be displayed while other ones won't. Those that will always be displayed are called dominant, and those that are sometimes displayed are referred to as being recessive. Today we now refer to these factors as genes. So just to jump ahead here a few centuries, we know that there are many different forms of genes. So for instance, we all have genes for eye color, but there's different types of eye color genes. Some people have a gene for brown eyes, some have a gene for blue eyes, some have a gene for green eyes. All those different forms of genes are known as alleles. An allele is defined as an alternate form of a gene. A lot of times we might be using some of those terms interchangeably because it's referring to the same thing. Mendel's second principle is the principle of segregation. Organisms inherit 2 genes for every trait. They're getting one from mom, one from dad. The two copies of these genes, however, have to somehow separate during gamete formation. Now recall, gametes is another name for the sex cells or the sperm or the egg cells. Also recall that Mendel doesn't know anything about things like meiosis or cell division, but he's just hypothesizing based on his data that somehow these traits are separated from each parent and are going to be randomly assigned to the offspring. Mendel was partially right on this. Yes, we do need to have two genes for every trait. We get one from mom, one from dad, but actually most of our genes are not controlled by simply two genes. They are controlled by many genes. Those were Mendel's first two principles. He actually has three principles on genetics. We'll get to that one in another video when we talk about the process of meiosis. And I can't wait to tell you about it.